So as always, if you have any questions during the class material about last week, about now, just interrupt me. I'm completely fine with that as a workflow. So today we're going to actually be using R, which sounds wonderful after last week's just continuation of the syllabus and talking about the website. So in that we're talking about, there's a lot of ways that people teach coding. The most effective way generally shown through a lot of studies and mostly studies of pedagogy is to live code with the instructor. So instead of me pasting lines of code and you trying to frantically type, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be explaining what I'm doing, typing, and you all on your own computer should be typing along with me. And then like, if you have a question about the code, try to run it a different way. And so this is a very interactive lecture. All of the code I'm going to be writing will be uploaded after, but I, more than encourage you to follow along with me. So when I'm typing, you'll be typing. You can, as I said, experiment with what you're typing to learn more about what you're doing. And that's the best way to really learn coding and specifically to learn R. So as that's a big part of the pedagogy, we'll just get started. So I'm going to share my screen. And now the big question now is that an okay font size for everyone? Have it zoomed in a decent amount? Okay, great. So R has different panels. Well, RStudio has different panels that we're going to be using, and I'm going to talk us through all of that. But the first thing you should know is that R as a programming language is basically just a fancy calculator. So if you see here, there's a little arrow, and you can see my cursor blinking. That means it's ready for me to type something. And so if I want it to be used as a calculator, I could type 1 + 6, and it'll output 7. Basic calculator, as I said. What about 1 × 3000? It's going to let me know that that's 3000. This is a very inefficient way to use R because we could just open the calculator on our phones, but it shows you this is basically what R is built on, is just thinking about the math behind it. But we can do more complicated things. We can do something like 3 + 5 × 2, and it's going to evaluate it in the order. Oh, that's weird. Sorry, everyone just got really small. Probably just people turned off their cameras. Okay. It's going to evaluate everything in the order that we learned in middle school math, which was like PEMDAS, or parentheses, then exponents, then multiply, then divide, then add, then subtract. So in that order, it's going to evaluate everything. But sometimes, maybe I wanted to evaluate the 3 + 5 first. I can put parentheses around it. All of this basic kind of Excel sort of language, it knows how to evaluate. I can make it even more complicated, add more and more parentheses. The idea is that you want it to be readable to yourself in the future and to anybody else who might be looking at what you're writing. But if I'm writing here, all of this is going to disappear after I close R, which isn't a really great workflow. I usually want to save my work. I want to be able to run it again in the future. I don't want to have to retype this. So normally when we're writing in R, we don't want to be writing here. This is called the console, and this is just like a command line. If anybody knows something about shell or any sort of command line interface, this is just a command line, and we want to save what we're writing generally. So this is really great for experiments or trying something out, and then when you actually want to save something, we want to open something else, which would be a script or an RMarkdown document. So to do that, I'm going to say right now that a lot of people use scripts for their writing of code in R. I'm going to open a script and an RMarkdown document to show you the differences between them. So if I click this little new page button with that green plus sign, that'll open a new script. I can also do Control-Shift-N on Windows. And then I'm also going to open an RMarkdown document. If you can't open this yet, I'll explain why. But if I click RMarkdown, that'll also open, and I'm just going to leave these defaults. It always asks for some meta information. Okay, so a script is great, except if I want to write written by Kelsey, and then 3 times 2 plus 5. The issue is in scripts, it's going to want to evaluate what I just wrote. Every single line it wants to evaluate. So if you're writing a script, you have to put a # before every piece of text that you write so that it doesn't evaluate it. This is called commenting it out. It's pretty general for any scripting language. However, if you want to write an entire paragraph about what this purpose is, what the purpose of this document is, I'm not going to write a paragraph because that would be a waste of time. It gets annoying. That scripts are great for certain purposes, but for a class for data science, generally we're going to want to use an RMarkdown document. So I'll show you now what the differences are. So again, in a script, I have to comment out anything I don't want evaluated. But also, I do want to show you before I move on, before I forget, if I want to run this line of code, there's multiple ways I can do it. So I can, some people do copy and paste, which is terribly inefficient. Don't do that. The best way really is to put your cursor on the line of code that you want run. And on Windows, it's Control-Enter. Sorry, Control-Enter, yeah. Nope, it's Command-Enter. Sorry, I'm going back and forth between 2 different computing systems. So on Windows, it's Command-Enter to run that line of code. So you can see I just did Command-Enter, and it'll evaluate down here. I can also, on this line of code, click Run, and it'll also evaluate that line of code. So you'll see on both of those times, it also put the written by Kelsey because that's a comment right above it. That's pretty normal. But again, we don't want to be using a script necessarily. We'd rather use an RMarkdown document. And so now I'm going to go over to the other document I opened. And I'm going to copy this so I can paste it over there and show you what the difference is. So don't save. And I'm just going to, a very general workflow when you're working with RMarkdown is you're just going to delete everything after these three lines. And I will explain more of what that means when I get more onto RMarkdown and stop just talking about basic R. So if you see now, it may be hard to tell if you're not used to the language, which I don't think anybody is, but right now it's not ready to evaluate 3 times 2 plus 5 as code. And so I'm going through this part really fast. I'm going to go more into detail later, but if I click knit, which most of you don't know what that means, but you will. I'm just going to save it in downloads just because this is just a test and I just want to show you something quick. Should take like 10 seconds because it's very little code. Okay, so while that's taking way too long to evaluate, the point of this is R doesn't know to evaluate this as code. And so everything that's here, it's going to evaluate as text, kind of the opposite of our script. So what we have to do here, okay, there we go, finally. I don't know why it took so long. I would want to put things into what we call a chunk. I'm going way ahead of myself. I'm not following my lesson plan right now, but you know, if we want something to be evaluated as code, we would put it inside these little backticks. I'm going to explain that more when I go back to my lesson, but here's the point. My computer is just slow. It must be Zoom. Yeah, everything's just very slow. So I basically ran this, did something called knit. I'll go into more of it. And you can see that it's printing out my code, but it's not necessarily evaluating it, and that's not what I want. So all in all, this really big rabbit hole I just went down into is we want to use RMarkdown because we can both write text and write code together and have them both be evaluated nicely. It's easier to write. Yeah. So now I'm going to jump back to my lesson plan where I should be without going too much off script and talk about RProjects. So many of you will have heard about something of a working directory. A working directory is basically where am I on my computer by default, and where have I told my computer to look for my documents that I want to be pulling from. So if I have data in a folder, where am I going to tell it to look for? So right now, I am in, if I just click go to working directory, I'm in a folder called R, because by default, under my global options, this is something you can change. I have R set to go to the R folder under my documents to look for everything. When we're working in a class, when we're working on a project, when we're working at work, and we have a specific task we're assigned with, we don't want to be in the R folder. We want to be in a folder specific to our task that we're trying to do. So instead of looking at my working directory here, I can also write get WD here, and it'll tell me where exactly I'm at on my computer. It's just like, it's not super efficient. Basically, anything that I tell it to look for, I would need to tell it. So if I was like, oh, I want you to go to my stat 412 folder and then look for a data file, something like that, and then look for a, I don't know, cars.csv. If I wanted it to find this file, I would be using something called a relative path. So an absolute path on your computer would be including, on Mac, it would be a tilde. On Windows, it's that C:\\, and it's saying on your computer, an absolute path is this really long text of where on my computer I want you to look for. And relative path is compared to where I'm already at, which would be here, find this folder. So this would, let's say I had a subfolder called stat412. So let me just type this here so it makes more sense. So absolute path would be and a relative path would be this. So this is all to say relative paths are superior to absolute paths for a lot of reasons. One being, oftentimes you're collaborating with other people and they do not have the exact structure of folders as you do on your computer. Also, you may have more than one computer that you use, and each computer is going to have its own kind of file structure, even if you're using something like Google Drive or GitHub to sync your documents together. So if you use a relative path and everyone's working from the same folder on their relative computer, it saves you a lot of headache because you don't want to be writing these absolute things. However, I want to go one step further and explain to you that projects are your friend. So an R project basically makes it so you don't have to set your working directory. So if I wanted my path that I want everything in my code to talk to be different than this, I would have to manually set my working directory, and that's a pain. We don't want to do this. I know for some of you this is completely over your head, but I'm just going to solve all the issues you're going to have in the future by using an R project instead of talking too much about paths. So what I'm going to do now, and I suggest that everyone follow along with this part now, is I'm going to click File and click New Project right below New File. Hold on. I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to deal with that. Go away, delete. Now that I'm actually going to start on an actual picture. So is it popping up somewhere else? Okay, there we go. So for everyone, you're going to want to click New Directory. So basically, we're going to create a new folder on our computer that's going to host all of the documents we're going to be using for this course. So I'm going to click New Directory, and there's a bunch of things here generally. I assume for most of you, it's by default, and we're just going to click New Project. And we're going to make a new directory. So I'm going to call it stat412. I don't want to write 612 because that's just more numbers. So stat412 classwork. You could write something called just stat412. You could write whatever you want. The main idea though is that you don't have any spaces in whatever you're writing and that you're going to be able to find this in the future. So because I want to be able to find this in the future, I'm going to take this directory and click Browse and decide where I want this saved. Right now it wants to save in my Google Drive. I don't want it there. I want it in my R folder. So for everyone, that's going to look very different, but choose where you want this to be saved on your computer. I'll tell you right now that if you save it under something that's in Google Drive, because that's a very general workflow for me, besides our stuff, about once a minute, you're going to get a warning that things aren't syncing correctly, and it's a pain. So I suggest you don't save it under Google Drive. It's just something you have to work with, or every time you want to work in R, you need to pause your Google Drive syncing. I don't know why this is a thing. I think it's specifically a thing on Windows, but I assume a lot of people have a Windows laptop. So that's another aside. Here we have Create Project. I'm going to click Create Project, and it's going to open it up to me. If you are a Git user and you know what that is, go ahead and make it a Git repository. If you're not a Git user and you have no idea what I'm talking about, ignore that. And click Create Project. And then that's me because I clicked it like 5 times. I'm going to click Cancel. And there we go. So now everyone should see on their screens, the very top of your screen, it should say the name that you just saved this project as. Over here, it should say the name. You have the project. You can switch between projects like this using the little R cube on the right side of the screen. And then on the bottom pane, which says Files, it should you should be in the folder that you just named with a file that's called whatever you just named, .RProject. You don't need to work with that file, but the cool thing about it is you can make specific settings for this project there. So if I click Project Options under Tools, I can, edit some project options. I suggest for everyone, you on Save Workspace to our data on exit, you click No. I already have this on my R as turned off, but I do suggest this. What this is saying is basically anything I have open, save it. You don't want it saved because you want everything to be reproducible and you don't want to be opening things you don't actually have saved. We can cover that again in the future, but I also don't like to restore my workspace. So I would click No there. And then I would click OK. So now this is all saved in my R project. If I click that, it's going to bring that up. So now if I type get working directory, it's going to know exactly where everything I type is going to be referred to. Now we can get back into a little bit of RMarkdown. So I assume most people didn't do this. I would be surprised if anybody did. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to install our first package. So what a package is in R, we talked about this last time, is it's kind of like an application on your phone. It's adding more features, more capabilities based on the same phone that you have. So to install a package here on our console, we're going to type install.packages. And you can see that R Studio is already trying to autocomplete. It's pretty sure I'm going to type install.packages. So I can either click tab, I can click that, or I can just keep typing. I'm going to click tab to autocomplete. And now I want to install a package. So here within quotation marks, we're going to type the package NITR. So knit, like knitting, like crocheting, R. And then I'm going to click enter. I'm just going to click enter because I have the package, but if I don't have the newest version, it'll update it. If I do have the newest version, it just won't do anything. So if everybody gets knitter downloaded, it should take a maximum of like 30 seconds and it's not that large of a package. Yeah, see, it's already downloaded. You'll probably receive some red things. Red in R does not mean bad. That's something a lot of new learners are surprised by. Red does not mean everything's broken and it's about to explode. It just means something's happening and it's a message. So for me, I got the package knitter successfully updated or unpacked and sums checked. Now I have the package knitter. If anybody received anything else, please speak up now. Oh, Mal, you have something to say. And Sydney does too.
Yeah, just a question. In a different class, when we've installed a package, it's just like there with knitter, but also there'd be a comma and then dependencies equals true. What's the difference between the two?
So if you don't put the comma dependencies equal true, it just means that R will ask you manually, like, do you want these different dependencies to be downloaded? So sometimes if I'm installing a package or I'm updating a package, that package relies on other things. So knitr relies on, like, let's say 10 packages in the background. Right now it's going to default to true, but let's say I'm updating it and sometimes I don't have the newest version of all the packages. It's going to ask me, do you want to update this package, this package, this package, this package, and it'll ask you in the console as you're working on it. So dependencies equals true probably is just a great habit. I think by default, actually, this is a great chance, while I see 2 other raised hands, to show you how we can look at what the default behavior of something is. So let's say I had a question about install packages. What I can do in the console is write $install packages, click enter, and it'll give me more information about that. So I believe dependencies equals true is default. So to see if something's default, it would be here in this usage. So let me just read. So here it's dependencies equals NA is the default behavior. So probably dependencies equals true is a better behavior. Okay, let's see. Sydney had a question, I believe.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to say that I didn't get the same output as you when you installed the knitr package. I got a bunch of stuff that said like package lib path version priority. It was all black text. I didn't get any red.
Okay.
Also didn't
it sounds like it's
like
fine, but do you want to share your screen so we can all see it? I think it might be because you're on Mac, and again, these look different for some fun reason.
It says it's disabled screen sharing.
Goodness. Okay, I need to change that on my own settings, but let's see. Hold on, let me stop share. On my other Zoom account, I have that set by default, so I have to figure out how to change it now. So screen sharing, advanced sharing options, all participants. Okay, there you go. Now you should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is just going to be beneficial for everyone to kind of read the different outputs that you can get.
Do y'all see that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I just don't have anything red.
Yeah, it looks correct. It's okay. So can you do one test for me? Where the next line is, can you type library parentheses and then knitr? KNITR, yep. Yes, so that's a great way to test if something actually installed. So when you have an app downloaded, basically, it doesn't mean it's always going to be open. Just like on your cell phone, if your app's not open, it's probably not actually working. And so every time we want to use a package, we have to type library and then the package name. Knitter's kind of funky because that's not necessarily true with knitr, but the rest of them you do need to type library to bring it into your working session. So here it didn't give us any error when we typed library, so it looks like it installed correctly.
Okay, thank you.
So let me share screen. Yep.
I also didn't get the same screen.
Okay.
I got the red text, and then the red text said it's installing other packages like Mime, Blue, Magatir,
yep,
etc.
Okay, and did it eventually?
Yeah, and then
it finished.
Yeah, so it said the binary packages were downloaded, and it gave me a folder to check.
Perfect. So now on your next line, try the same thing, that library parentheses knitr, and see if that loads it in. It should. I think it's done. I think it's done for everyone.
Okay, it worked.
Perfect. Okay, and then we had a chat. Okay, MD-Sum5 needs compilation build. Okay, yeah, I think yours, Hanwei, looks the same as Sydney's. Yeah, and as Mal says, this is a great aside too. If you click, so here's files where most people are at. If you click packages, you can see all the packages you have downloaded, and I have probably 1,000 times what most people have. And you can look for the package you just downloaded. So if I scroll down or right here, type KNI, I'll be able to find the package. And if it's there, that means it works. Okay, so now everyone can follow along with me to open a new RMarkdown document. So,
Professor.
Yes.
My package installed but for some reason it says the R tools required is not installed
Okay, so
in red. I don't know
I
which
had a
one
feeling we were going to run into this, so give me just a moment.
Okay.
Was there a pop-up when you typed install packages that said download from binary, yes or no? Did anything pop up?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
So usually you need R tools, which I'm going to paste into the chat. Usually you need R tools if you're trying to download something from the binary instead of just having it already compiled. Binary compiled is a lot of very computer sciencey stuff that you don't need to know too much about. You can ask Semyon later, probably. I think we have someone else who is computer science. Basically, do you want to download it from like its raw form or its kind of like more ready form? Windows is wonderful. I've learned over the years that Windows is not the best for a lot of coding that you want to do. And on Windows, if you want to compile something, you need this package called, or this like .exe, this like actual application on your computer called RTools. I downloaded it once and never thought about it again, but sometimes you need to think about it. So go ahead and download that and it should work. I'm surprised it required it. So usually if you're downloading a package, there's a pop-up in RStudio that says, would you like to download the original binaries? And if you say no, I don't think you need this package. So this is why this is interactive. Okay. So if you have that downloaded, if you don't,
Professor Mac, I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's okay.
It says the packages like were binary though that installed.
Yeah. It could be something special about the knitter package because it kind of changes slightly the way that RStudio works. So just get the RTools 40 downloaded that I put in the chat. If anybody else is on a Windows computer, you can do this too. It only takes a few minutes, and then it should work fine. And if it doesn't, we can figure it out after. Okay, so while he gets his RTools working, I'm going to jump into opening a new RMarkdown document. So now that you have Knitter installed, you should be able to click the new file button and see RMarkdown here. Does everyone who just installed Knitter for the first time see that? Because I'm not sure if we need to actually restart RStudio. I'm seeing a head shaking yes. So if it is, click RMarkdown, new RMarkdown. And now let's type something like class 2, because technically this is the second class. Week 2, class 1, but class 2 total. And then you can type your name here as author. You can just leave everything else the same and click OK. So I'm going to kind of, the great thing about RStudio, we've got these 4 panes. You can rearrange them, but I leave everything as default for teaching because it's most likely going to look like yours. But you can hover over these lines and you can make things bigger and smaller. So I can move that over so I can see more things. And now what I'm going to have everyone do so we can actually talk through these details is everything after those 3 dashes, delete. Yes?
What are we supposed to name the RMarkdown file?
So you can name it whatever you want. I put class 2 because this is class 2.
Okay. And then we can leave it as HTML.
Yes, HTML is fine.
It shows it's like it needs some package to install.
Is that a yes no question on the
Yeah. Yes,
pop-up?
no.
Click yes.
Oh, okay.
And hopefully it works. This is what's really fun about not being able to like see everyone's screens nice and quickly. Okay, so erase everything after those 3 lines, and it should look something like what's on my screen. All right, so I know some people are catching up. Mal, do you have another question?
Yeah,
Okay.
after I created the RMarkdown, so it gave me a bunch of, I mean, maybe this is just a default, but You gave me a bunch of stuff after the.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Right.
just go ahead and highlight all of that and delete it. It's the
So
default.
is that just
behavior.
a default thing that comes
Yeah.
through?
And every time you open one, it's going to have it. It basically gives you both code chunks and some fancy markdown text. So like you can see what it would look like, but I don't want it. I want to teach you all of that by hand. So just delete everything but lines 1 through 6, basically. Okay. So you might be asking what these little lines are and what this all is. This is called a YAML, which I actually didn't know what it stood for while I was writing this lesson. And so I looked up what is a YAML, Y-A-M-L, and it's literally YAML ain't markup language, which is kind of nonsense. But basically what YAML is it's a required output field when you're making RMarkdown so that it there's certain kind of code in the background that knows write name here, write year here, write all of this details. What do I want to output? What's my output type? This is basically like meta information for this markdown file so that when we knit it, which I gave an example of earlier, it will compile it correctly. So like if you didn't want date to be shown, you could erase it. The only thing that's actually required is the output part. But, you know, if you ever want to change what the name is, maybe you want it to look actually nice and say class 2 instead of having all lowercase and a dash, you could do that because it's independent of the name of the file. So I could say Kelsey Gonzalez and classroom because we're all writing this together. You know, I could change it however I wanted. So RMarkdown is based off a text language called Markdown. I hope that's not a surprise. And if you've never heard of Markdown, it's basically a very simple way to make language like underlined and highlighted and make texts nicely. So if you've ever worked in like Stack Overflow or typed anything on GitHub, there's a lot of websites where Markdown is the basic kind of compiling language. So even on something like WhatsApp, if you write on WhatsApp, hello, with underscores around it, it's actually going to run in Markdown to say that this is going to be, I think that makes it italics. I usually use asterisks instead. So, or if I write hello like this on WhatsApp, or I don't think it works on Messenger, but any sort of thing like that, oftentimes it's running in Markdown. So Markdown lets you type code with these little kind of tricks to give it like flourishes and flair. So you can also write headers with it. So I'm going to write a header. To write a header now, I use the # or hashtag, as us young kids like to call it now. So I'm going to say RMarkdown, and then you have to break the line to go past that header, which makes sense. So this part's going to be a header. Then like if I wanted a lower header, so, you know, in documents or like in an article you may have written, you have like your main points and then your subpoints. If I want something smaller than our Markdown, I could say like header level 3. So you can see here, actually, this is already filling out these headers in this little drop-down menu to let you navigate within your document. So I could have a really long document and navigate pretty quickly. So I can write that and then I can say something like, this is my first knitter document. I want to make a list. And then, so if I want to make a list, this is something I always forget, you have to have 2 breaks in between that and the next line. A lot of this you're just going to learn by looking at the documentation over and over until it kind of just becomes second nature. But to make a list, you can use the plus sign, you can use the dash, you can use the asterisk, and you can say list 2, list 3. These are terribly ununiform, but you get the idea. That's how I would make a list. And then I could say that I want list 2 to be bold. So I would have to put asterisks around it So the way I did that, let me just undo so you can see it, is I highlighted the text I wanted and clicked asterisk. And RStudio is smart enough to know that if you're highlighting something and you put parentheses, asterisks, underscores, brackets, anything like codey that it knows you want on both sides, it'll put it on both sides instead of replacing it, which is really nice. So if I do 2 asterisks, it'll put that in bold. So I can say bold. And then if I want it italics, I can underline. Sorry, yeah, not underline, put underscores around it. That doesn't look right though. I should highlight it. So I might, there's like multiple ways to do everything. And I don't use italics that much. I'm just going to do 1, and I think that's going to do italics. So I think that might differ from what my lesson plan says, but we'll see when we knit this in a second. Then I can also have numbered list. So what's cool here, if I wanted a numbered list like 1 through 10, I can write 1, 2, and then I can write 5, and it'll know whether I repeated numbers, whether I messed up my numbers. I want these in numbered order. So now that we have all of this basic little markdown code, so this is, we're using markdown language in RMarkdown. We can, up here on the knit button, we can either just click the knit button or click the arrow next to it and say knit to HTML. So while mine is working on that, what was my file name again? Class 2. While mine's running, does anybody have any questions on what I just talked about or anything?
How do we run it again?
How do we run it? So this button up here that has a little piece of yarn, we click that one. So you can see now mine knitted, and now, so after I click the knit button, it rendered everything. And you can see that it rendered because if I click the RMarkdown tab next to console, it'll say a bunch of nonsense, more or less. It's not nonsense, it makes sense, but, and it'll say that it had an output. So that means there was an output, and by default, it's gonna open up in this viewer pane. So files, viewer, on this bottom right, it'll open up what we just wrote. So we learned something in this, that the underscores do work as italics, and so do the 1 asterisk. So I don't know why. I'm not positive why this one highlights and this one's not highlighted. I think it's because it's within a list. It's a rabbit hole that I shouldn't go down right now, but you can see that both of those turned out as italics. So there's a lot of like experimentation here. You learn which you like to use for yourself. But the great thing is that on our classroom website, under resources, there's a whole RMarkdown kind of cheat sheet that you can employ when you're writing code. And you can see here, 1, 2, 3 works correctly, even though I wrote 5 here. So if you change up your numbered list eventually, and you don't want to have to rewrite all the numbers by hand because that would be ridiculous, it knows automatically to fix it for you. So if I want to write headers, so now I can like go back and write more and then reknit it to see the new output. So I can write header 1, header 2, header 3, header 4. These will all work as different size headers. And I'm going to click knit while I start working on making a link. So I want to link you to our website. And then if I want to have website be a link that people can click on, because this is an HTML output by default, what I can do is in website, I can click website and put square brackets around it. Remember, I taught you that trick about RStudio where it'll automatically put them on both sides. And then I can put parentheses after. So the, I'm going to write a little trick here. So it's link name, and then link. So if I put things in backticks, it's not going to evaluate them. It actually will.
Quick question.
Yes.
How did you do in the keyboard to write those little things that are like similar to apostrophes but are not apostrophes?
Great question. So if you have a American English keyboard, because this is in different places on different people's keyboards, it is to the left of the 1. So above tab and to the left of 1, it's called a backtick.
Thank you so much. I've struggled with that button.
It's something you'll see a lot in programming languages, but if you have never programmed before, it's like, where the heck is that thing? And a lot of people put apostrophes and it's like not the same thing. So the trick here is to put the link name in square brackets and then the link in round brackets. So I'm going to copy our course website and put it into here. So now we have our headers that are now rendered. And now if I click knit again, it'll put that as a link. Let's let it load. There we go. So something really interesting here. We have website as a link that I could click on now. And then we have this thing, link name link, which basically told RMarkdown that this is code. And so make it kind of a different color. Put it into a, I just forgot the name, where all of the letters are evenly spaced instead of normal text code, like Corey or New is one of the texts that does it. But you may notice here I have these on 3 different lines, but here they all compressed into 1 line. That may not be something you want when you're actually writing. So the trick here is at the end of every line, you have to have 2 spaces if you want them to be new lines. Or you have to have a enter in between them. That's just how it knows to, in the back end, put like a new line break is if you have 2 lines at the end of it. So that's the same reason why these have to have a space in between them as well. So now let's go on to images. If I want to put an image in, it's very similar to the link actually. So let me put it in backticks first. So we would put exclamation mark. Square brackets would be the caption. Oh, that is, there we go, caption, and then in parentheses, the file name or URL. So, closing parentheses. So now if I want a image here, I can put a parentheses, and here say orangutan. And then I'm just going to go look up a URL or a URL of an image of orangutan on my other screen, and then copy its hyperlink. So let's see if that'll work. That is way too long of a hyperlink. I don't want that one.
I have a question. I still don't understand why you have to put like link name and then like link in parentheses. Like,
so that's me just showing you all how to do that one. So here is where if you're actually writing a link, it would just be like this. So if you're just writing a link into your document, it would be a square bracket, parentheses, parentheses. If I want it here, I wish I could zoom in, but if I want it here how it's not actually going to be evaluated. So here, this became evaluated as a link.
Yeah.
Here, R didn't try to render it for us. So it just came out link name, link, because I put backticks around it. Does that kind of clear it up?
Yep. And
okay.
I have a question. Why did you only use like 1 apostrophe so it doesn't take it into consideration? Like.
So this is what you're talking about, right? What
yeah. I don't know what's the actual name of that.
So that's a backtick here. And so that is just how RMarkdown works. If I put something in a backtick, okay, it's actually how Markdown works and RMarkdown. If I put something between backticks, it knows that that's code. And so it just has to be 1. If I put 2, it would like open code, open, close code, close code. So this is not this. So can you see? So in R, you will learn that this means not. So this backtick is not an apostrophe, and this is not an apostrophe. So this is its own little thing. And so there's no reason to put two of them, basically. All right, let me see if I can get my image of an orangutan in here. It's kind of a long link. Let's see if it works. So again, here, that's why I'm putting this here, just so you can see in the output, that's what it looks like. And then hopefully the next one will actually render an orangutan. Sometimes using links online don't work. But while that loads, I'm going to show you, here's just what I have open on my other screen. I'm going to save an image of orangutan to the file where we're working. So mine is under R, under classwork. Eventually, I'm going to ask you all to make an images file. So I'm just going to make that now. And then, WebP file, gross. Hold on. Let me find one that's an actual like PNG or JPEG. I feel like I'm jumping around a lot, but these are all things I needed to say, so. Okay, there we go. I got a JPEG, so one moment. Oh, okay. Well, my orangutan worked, as you can see here, I believe. Can everyone see the orangutan? Yes. Okay, good. So
can you share the link in the chat, please? Is that
yes.
possible?
It's a long one, but chat. If you want the orangutan, there it is. But also, I'm gonna make another image because now I made an image folder on my RMarkdown project. So if I click Files, I made a new folder called Images, and I saved a new image for another picture of an orangutan. So if I want to not bring one from URL online, if I want to have a local image, I can do \images and type. Of course, I don't want to type that out by hand. So if anybody was wondering what I just did, to copy and paste this, I can't like highlight this like you could in your file folder. So what I always do with just my own trick that I developed some point along the way is I click it and I click rename so that I can highlight it, but I didn't actually rename it. And you'll see it says no image. So I think, there we go. I don't actually need that first backslash. So now it'll, once I click knit, it'll put two different images of orangutans. One is a URL from the World Wide Web somewhere, and then the other one is a JPEG I downloaded into my image folder in my project. Okay. So before I knit this again, just because it takes a few seconds, I want to show you, you can do subscripts and superscripts, which is how you can get like exponents or base numbers, like if you're typing log something. So to get a subscript, which is the bottom one, I could type like log tilde 10 tilde. So the tilde is that same backtick button, but if you click shift, it's the squiggle. And then a superscript would be with the carets. So let me write what that would be. So like if I wanted to write r squared, it would look like this. So the caret is what I've always called it. I'm sure there's a better name for it, is if you click shift 6, it'll render up higher. So now if I click knit, I'll get the new image and these subscript and superscripts. And this is the last little part of Markdown specifically that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of tips and tricks. We don't really need to talk about most of them, but okay, so now we have two different orangutans. One I had saved on my computer. One was from a link, and then now we can see we have log 10 and r squared. All things you may need to use for reproducible reporting. So I could write an entire journal article here, including citations in RMarkdown. So everything would be contained within one document, which is really cool if you've ever tried to write a journal article or a report of some sort that's not just like one figure that you need to include. So now I'm going to make a new heading and I'm going to call it chunks. So in RMarkdown, this so far has all just been text. It's beautiful, but what if I want to write code? So if I want to write code, it would be in a chunk. So I gave you a preview of this earlier. Error, unexpected back. It could be, if you followed the orangutan specifically, how I had an extra explanation point, it could be that, but just make sure it's explanation point, square bracket, and then parentheses. You could even take out the caption if you want to, like, a lot of people just put images like this because they don't put captions. Try it like that. Otherwise, you can also try it with quotation marks around your caption. Try it those different ways, Raphael. Okay, so a chunk I showed you all earlier, and there's a few different ways to make a chunk. The worst way you could possibly do this, but I think it gives you an exact idea of what this would look like. So in the future, don't do this with it this way, would be 3 backticks, curly bracket, R, 3 backticks. So that would take forever. You're going to miss curly brackets. You're going to miss backticks. It's going to be a mess, but it gives you a really good idea of what exactly a chunk looks like. So it's got 3 backticks, which are the apostrophe-esque symbol that we've learned today. It's got a curly bracket and it's got R. R is here because it's telling RStudio what language I want it to evaluate. Because what's really cool, now I'm moving on to the second way to how to insert a chunk. If I click where it has this green C, that stands for chunk. If I click the arrow next to it, I can type in Python here, I can type in SQL here, and it'll evaluate correctly. But this is an R class, so I'm going to click R. You can see it did the exact same thing. All it did was basically paste this code out. And then the third way to do it, and let me see, I have it specifically written out on my course plan, but if you're on Windows, it's CtrlAltT. So Control plus Alt plus, sorry, I, not T, on Windows, or I believe that's Command I on Mac. So try that on whichever one you're on. So for me, it's CtrlAltI, and it enters a new chunk. Multiple different ways to do it. Sometimes when you do Control-Alt-I, it'll make a smiley face or a heart randomly because it's doing the Alt special markup language. No one knows why. Hadley Wickham, the creator of the Tidyverse, says it's because we love you. There was a tweet that said that for real. Yeah, great, Ash, Command. So those are the 3 ways to make a chunk. Command I doesn't work. If you're on Mac, it should be the little, let me draw on my screen. Wait, where did my annotate, draw? It should be this symbol on Mac, which is the command symbol. If it doesn't work, you can experiment a few different other ways, but at the end of the day, you can just do the this and then click R. Because no matter what, all 3 of those is going to give you the same output. There's just a certain hotkey. Another way to check on your computer what that hotkey would be, I believe it's on help. Let me see. There's a way to see all your hotkeys. There we go. So under tools, there's a keyboard shortcuts help, and that'll bring up a screen here of all the many shortcuts you could use. And so you'll have to find the one, source editor, source control. There we go. So under source editor, it should be the first one to insert chunk. For me, it's Control-Alt-I.
So it's Control-Option-I.
There you go. Okay. You know what? That's probably on my sheet. I have a little weird symbol that I wasn't sure what it meant. That must mean option on Mac. So thank you for clarifying that. Great. So now what does this do? If I type 3 plus 5 here, okay, 54, because that's what I typed, I can click this little play button next to it and it'll evaluate and put out the chunk information at the bottom. I can change that. Give me a second. Chunk output inline. If I change that, it'll actually put the chunk output here like it would when you knit your document. That's just personal preference. I like to have it out in the console. Put it wherever you want it, and I can remove output. That's all personal preference. So whichever one you like more, if you want it to input or output right here, if you want it to output here, you choose whichever one you want. To do that, I clicked the gear next to the knit button. So anything I type in here will be outputted when I click the play button. So it'll output both different commands that I typed. If within here, I only hover over one line and I click Control Enter, like I did earlier, or Command Enter, it'll only evaluate the line I'm on. So those are two different ways you can think about these chunks. You can think about the chunk as the entire piece of code you want to run, but usually you have smaller subcommands or functions within it, and you might want to only run one at a time. So you have to think, do I want to run the entire chunk, like that cell, or do I want to just run one line? Where are we at? So now I'm going to erase these because that's too many empty chunks for my brain, and talk you through some other mathematical functions. So this is where we're getting outside of our markdown and into actual R, which is what you're all here to learn. So in R, a function works where you first have something typed, and then usually in parentheses you have options. So if I type sine, like trigonometry, 1 would be one of the options, and then sine would be the function. So I can run that line, and the sine of 1 is 0.84. I can also, there's so many that are automatically built into R, like log 1. If you're ever wondering if I do some hotkey that you don't understand, please interrupt me, but so far I'm just running the individual lines. I can do log 10 of 10, which is 1. And I can even do exp, which, what does exp stand for? I'm not positive. Well, it's, you can see the automated output when you're typing it before you click the parentheses. So this is how it would autocomplete. I can see the exp, I believe, no, not expand grid, go to the other one. Log computes logarithms, by default natural logarithms. Log 10 computes common base 10 logarithms. So exponentiate computes the exponential function. There we go. So if I click exp of 0.5, that is the same as writing e to the, where's the, there, 1/2. So you can see here, I put a comment like we learned way earlier on in this lesson after the code. And so now it knows evaluate this, but don't evaluate this. So you can see also it's highlighted in green, which means it's a comment. You can do that even within chunks, which is really good to document to yourself what you're doing, to document to me what you're trying to do when I'm grading your homeworks, for instance. But it's also really good because in the future, 6 months from now, you might not know what this means. And so you can look at the comment next to it of what you were trying to do. So you might be like, how do I remember all of these functions? There's so many to learn. Well, the good thing is that you don't have to remember them all. You can look them up a lot of different ways. If you're just like, how do I make an exponent in R? On Google, it would tell you something like 5 squared would be something like that. But there's multiple ways to do it. And so you can do it using functions as well. Another way is if you see a function written. So like I saw exp and I was like, is that exponentiating? What exactly is that doing? That could mean a lot of different things. I can either read the little quick help document there, or I can do question mark in the console like I did earlier and type exp. Nope. Sorry, I clicked enter too fast. And the help documentation will come up here. And it usually, it's harder to read this documentation when you're first learning R, but this is a great way to see what different options there are. So here it's got the different bases you can put. So you can do a log non-10 and tell it what exact base you want. And my default behavior is every time I'm looking at help documentation is just scroll to the bottom and look at the examples here, because sometimes it's hard in the help documentations to look at those. Another really important thing we need to learn in R is how do I compare things. So for instance, in R, if I want to see if 1 equals 1, we know that 1 equals 1, you actually use 2 equal signs. We'll probably go over this part again because it's easy to forget, and new learners always have a problem of, do I use 1 equal sign or 2 equal signs? But 2 equal signs means you're looking at equality. So is 1 equal to 1? You can see in the output it says true. So I'll give you 2 guesses of 2 equals 1. It's false. But we also have things like, is 1 less than 2? Is 2 greater than 1? Is 1 greater than or equal to 1? These are all things that we can use to evaluate in R. Something like this, comparing 2 different numbers, is less useful than, let's say we have a data frame of students in this class and we want to only look at the people who are in undergraduate degrees. We might want to look using these sort of functions at who is less than a certain age, or who is in 612 versus 412. We could see that using these sort of evaluative comparison functions, I guess you would call them. We could do 1 is greater than or equal to -9. We can see whether those are true or false. Again, less useful when we're comparing 2 numbers, more useful when we're using this within another function to filter students, like I said. Now, finally, we're going to talk about variable assignments. So this was really quickly described in one of the chapters you read. I believe it was 4. And that's just because I wanted everyone to kind of look at that first before we talked about it. So variable assignment, if I want to make a variable x and I want it to be equal to 1/40th, 1/40th might not come out to a perfectly round number. Let's see. If I just highlight 140, it'll only evaluate that part. So let's see what 140 is equal to. 0.025. Let's say I don't want to write that over and over. So I can assign that to x. The first really cool thing is now, if I open up my environment, which usually auto opens, but it didn't, I can now see I have a value x, which is equal to 0.025. That's great because we can see what we have saved. One major advantage over Python. We can see what we have saved, but then we can do things with that. So whether I'm in the same chunk or in a separate chunk, I'll do a separate chunk just so you can see that it's still talking to each other. I can say x, let's do log x. So use one of the functions that I already wrote and talk to a variable I have assigned. So if I do log x, you can see that I can get the log of 1/40th without having to type 1/40th, without having to type 0.025. I can just save something. So what happens though if I'm just going to combine these into the same cell for continuity's sake. What happens now? Oh, I completely skipped over. What is this? I'm so good at teaching assignments, obviously. So in some languages, assignments are just the equal sign. In R, it's this arrow dash. Oh. So you can either type arrow dash, or my brain is so used to doing the hotkey that, oh, now I forgot the hotkey because I'm thinking too deeply. For me, it's command minus sign or command dash. So let's write that in a comment. And plus minus. Oh, that's very confusing, but and I don't remember what it is in Mac off the top of my head, but because it's 2 different symbols, a lot of people just use the hotkey like me, and so I believe it might be like command control back minus sign in Mac, but if anybody wants to try it and figure it out or look at your tools, keyboard shortcuts, you can let me know. This is literally saying 1/40th goes into X. So there's a lot of different ways to read this, but sometimes it's saying X is 1 divided by 40. You can say X is assigned to 1 divided by 40. At the end of the day, you just know that whatever's on the right side of the assignment operator is evaluated and then assigned into whatever's on the left side. So the crazy thing though is I can reassign X now. So if I assign X to 100 now, and I run that line, what do you think is going to happen when I run log X again? Is it going to be log of 140 or is it going to be log of 100? The cheat sheet you could use is looking up at the value, what is X equal to? It's equal to 100. So now when I run it, you can see it's now 4.6. So you have to be careful. What are your assignments? You know, maybe you shouldn't write over your X. Maybe you should say X1, X2. Speaking of that, what should we be naming our items? There's a lot of different, what would you call that? Like ways people do things. Some people will say my variable, because you want things to be descriptive. You just don't want to say things X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because you're going to forget what those are. So you usually want to be descriptive. You could say something like my variable is equal to 5.3, or you could say my variable. These are going to be remembered as exactly what they are, but they're arguably equally readable to humans. This first one is using underscores. The second one is using what's called camel case, using a mix between uppercase and lowercase. People have opinions about this. Do whatever you find most helpful. At the end of the day, whatever you want to name your variables. Oh, thank you, Mal. So on Windows, yes, exactly.
I have a question. So you, like in R, you don't ever use like an == sign, right?
Technically it works, but it can give you issues sometimes. So let me just show you for example. This, if you look on the top right of the screen, is going to be the same as if I run this. Nothing's going to change. However, most people in R use this. Some people use this, but it's definitely a smaller part of the population. And in R, this was the only way to do it for a really long time. Python users really want to use the plus sign, equal sign. Again, it works, but sometimes you might have issues, and a lot of people like to keep the assignment separate from, eventually we're going to learn how to like make a new variable out of an old variable. In that, you have to use the equal sign. You're not using the assignment sign, so people like to keep those separate. If you use this one, I'm not going to grade you down for it. I'm just telling you the norm. Not recommended. But no one's gonna ever like fail you for it, you know? Yeah, and thank you, Mal, for correcting it. My keyboard has both Alt and Command because it's not a Windows or Mac keyboard, it's a Logitech keyboard. So yes, it's Alt/Command, whichever one is in that position. Okay, so back to what I was saying, I think. People have opinions. At the end of the day, write your variables for something that you're going to be able to read and remember what the heck it is assigned. Also that other people could read it and like it could help them understand what's going on. If you put underscores in it, if you put camel case in it, it doesn't matter. You can even put dashes as long as there's no spaces in it. The other rule is it can't start with a number. So if I wanted to say like 1x, that's going to give me an error, because I cannot have it start with a number, R. There's all these little things, but just make variables that are useful to you. Okay, and then finally, one last thing. If I want to make a Y variable, that is my variable times 2, I can do that. So you can see that I can always call in variables I have saved to create new variables doing whatever function I want, and it's, sorry, I never ran that line. And it's gonna evaluate them correctly because it knows what's saved. I don't know how well I'm explaining that. Hopefully that makes sense. We have one last thing we need to do today, and we have 5 minutes to do it. So I'm going to jump into that. Well, we have 2 things. One thing is in your chunks, you can first name your chunks. So I can name this variables, comma. So if I name a chunk, it's now going to show up in my little jump around sheet, where you can now see the name of the chunk, which is great because you might need to jump around some amount. But what's also cool is that there's certain options that you will be reading more about in your homework or your reading today that let you do cool things with chunks. So let's say in your report, you only want the output and you don't want to use the code you used to write the output. So meaning, I don't want this to show up, but I want the output of this to show up. What I would say is echo equals false. Every time you write true or false, it needs to be in capitals. And this would be saying, don't echo this chunk, but it will output. So by default, it's set to output, but I can also say eval equals true. Or I can say, there's a lot of different things. I'll let you just read more about it in the reading. But there's all these little tricks you can use. Basically, after the name of whatever your chunk is, it's comma and then whatever you want to do. Most of the time, you're just going to want to leave both of them. You want the chunk text, the code, and the output shown. So it's not super important, but eventually if you're writing reports, like maybe for your final report, you don't want the code to be shown, but you want your graphs to be shown. So that's where you would use that. Okay, and finally, we're going to talk for 1 second about some simple data. So this is just going to be a jump really quick before next week we get into plotting of what does data look like and how can I really quickly look at it. We have a whole week on exploratory data analysis, but right now I'm going to make a new chunk and I'm going to say data parentheses empty cars. So what data is doing is it's just saying there's some data in R that I want to bring into my current session. So if I click enter, or if I do control enter, you can see now I have empty cars value here and it says promise, which means it will be brought in. So there's a few different things I can do with this. I'm going to go over quite a few and I want to just explore these with you. And these are going to come up in our lab on Thursday. So I could first just type empty cars and see what happens with that when I output it. So let's do that first. So when I type empty cars, let me make it a little bit bigger. You see, I get what kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet, what kind of looks like what I would call a data frame printed in my console. So I've got different variables here. I've got different values of all of these different cars and what their mile per gallon is, what their cylinders is, disbursement, I think is what that is. I don't know. I'm not a car person, obviously. How many gears it has. I don't think that means carbohydrates. I think it means carburetor, but I don't know what a 1 or a 2 means. But we can see there's different values for these different types of cars. But let's say this data frame, like how many rows and columns does it really have? I can type nrow, which is a function of empty cars, to look at how many rows it has. So this has 32 cars being examined in this data frame of cars, but I can also type n columns. So how many variables are we looking at of these cars? 11. Well, what if I don't want to do this into 2 different steps? If I run dim empty cars, can you all tell what this is doing? So it's giving us the rows and the columns. So, you know, n row was 32, n col was 11.
Dimensions.
Yeah, exactly. Great, Raphael. Another thing I can do is, let's say this wasn't just 32 rows. Let's say this was 1,500 rows. I don't want all of those printed out into my console. That would be a lot of scrolling. R does have a maximum it will print, but it's close to 1,000, and I don't want that many. So what I can do is type head. This is the same as in a lot of programming languages. What head does is it limits to the first 6 rows in that data frame. So it's just going to print the first 6 and ignore the rest because we don't want that much output. We just want to see the first 6. So what do you all think tails would do then?
The bottom 6.
Thank you, Semyon. There we go. So we can see the bottom 6, and we just have 2 more to look at before class is over. So another one we can do is view empty cars. What this is actually going to do is it's going to open in a new tab here, a more Excel, I would say, like view of the data, which we can, we can sort it in different ways. This is all just very visual, but you can play with the data and really explore it manually this way. And then finally, we have one more. Also notice view has a capital V. Yeah, a lowercase v won't work. If you have a package we're going to download later downloaded, the lowercase will work, but for now you have to capitalize it. And then finally, we can do summary empty cars. And this will print out a very quick, minimum, first quartile, median, mean, third quartile, maximum of each of the variables or each of the columns in our data set. So again, we're going to go over these kind of in our lab and practice using them on a different data set on Thursday, just to really kind of get into looking at data, because really data science is about data. But I wanted to just give you a very quick rundown of each of these so you'd be able to play with them as we're going forward. So you have readings, they're on the website. I think it's like chapter 27 and chapter, 6, something like that. It's on the schedule on the website. Let's see. Chapter 8 and chapter 27, they're not too long. The Markdown chapter is longer. I think it's useful though to read. If you have more questions about Markdown itself or anything like that, in the lecture, actually, let me open this over here. In the lecture for today, so you can see the other readings by clicking week 2, or in the lecture, you can scroll down to the very bottom, and there's a part that says additional resources. And so there's a lot you can see here. You can see, I've referenced some things here, but there is an entire cheat sheet you can look at. I have this printed in my office. Like I just look at this every time I'm writing RMarkdown for things I don't do normally. This is the old version of it, so I should not have linked the old version, but it shows you basically on 2 pages of paper, front and back, basically everything you can do with RMarkdown. So all of those like headers and links you can use here. So it's a very good link, and there's just a lot on this. So I will end class here. I'm sorry for going 4 minutes over, and I'll see you all on Thursday for the lab. Come with questions from the reading, and then we're going to work in groups on your lab work. So thank you everyone very much. Let me stop sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so I have just, like I said, like 3 things to add on to last Tuesday's lecture. So one thing is a really cool way to view your RMarkdown documents kind of live while you're editing them that I don't actually use that much, but I think is a good tool to learn early on. And it also allows us to look at what add-ins are. So first thing we need to do is we have to install a new package. You'll learn that a lot. There's a lot of packages in R, and it's easy to forget what they all are. So like before, we can type install packages down here, but the name of this package is kind of a weird name, and I'll talk about why. And so instead of installing it down here, I'm worried I'm going to misspell it. In reality, I'm not, but if this is the first time you're installing it, you might want to go up to Tools, Install Packages, and here there will be a pop-up that will allow us to more interface with the packages that actually exist. So it will spelling correct us, for instance. So the package we're going to download is called Charingan, which is spelled X-A-R-I-N-G-A-N, which that may, for some of you, that might make sense why I don't always remember how to spell it. This package, for everyone who's following along, just go ahead and click install. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it. This package allows you to make RMarkdown slides. So instead of PowerPoint, it allows you to create slides in the same kind of context that we're creating them, which is really cool. But it has one feature that it allows for that we can use to live render our slides or our Markdown report. So I'm going to click cancel. I think that one only takes like less than a minute. So hopefully if someone clicked install, let me know when it's done installing, just interrupt me. And what that package lets us do is it has a function called Infinite Moon Reader. Great name. And what that is it's an add-in. So in R, there's different things you can add on to RStudio itself, kind of as additional functions. So I obviously have a lot of them here. You probably only have a few if this is your first time downloading RStudio. And there's one called Data Pasta, which is another great name, where you can highlight a table on the internet and then paste it into RStudio using this. It like formats it nicely. There's a lot of cool things like that. But like I mentioned, we're going to talk about Moonreader. So what Infinite Moonreader does is it will render the report that we've written. So I'm just basing this on the report that we were writing last time. And the really cool thing about it, it's going to pop up under Viewer once it's rendered, just like before. But every time we save the document, it's going to re-render. So it's here just like it was on Tuesday's class. But like I mentioned, let's say I say, oh, I want to say, instead of RMarkdown, I want to say Introduction to RMarkdown. When I click Save, it's going to make those changes really quick. So instead of clicking the knit button and waiting for it to go, especially if you have your chunks cached like before, this is just a different way to view it. Yeah. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. It gives you a quick introduction to what add-ins are. Again, there's a lot of them. There's really good ones for like citations and tools like that. But it also let you download the Cheringin package. And now two other things I wanted to cover, and then we'll get into our lab, are this panel right here. So I think you can get to it through View too, but if you go all the way to the right, you can click this button. It's got some horizontal lines, and that is a heading navigation tool. So if you're writing a longer document or you have multiple questions like we will have on homeworks, you can quickly skip to these different parts using this navigation menu. There's a different navigation menu that we have down here at the very bottom of your script editing window. That for me, it says Introduction to RMarkdown. And if you click the arrows next to it, it has the headers in bold, but it also has your chunks. So depending on how you want to navigate through your document, you can just scroll. But also, if I've named my chunks, like this chunk, I named variables. So remember to name a chunk right after R, which tells the chunk what language I want this to run on. I can say data exploration. And as long as I have no spaces there, that's going to be the new name for that chunk. So now, if I've named my chunks well, it makes it really easy to navigate between different areas of the document. Again, when it's such a short document like this, it doesn't make that much difference. But when it gets longer, this is really nice because you can say, importing data, wrangling data, visualization 2, all of these different things you can name, and you can see those here as well as the headers that you've made. So those are kind of two little navigation tools that I wanted to show you. So this one will stay open until you close it. This one will close after every time you navigate. And then the final one, let's see if I can get it to work. It is a part of the newest version of RStudio. So as long as you downloaded the newest version, I believe everyone did, but if you didn't, you might not see this. There is a little, I think this is called a compass, that the first time you click it, there'll be some options. Most of those defaults are okay. And it lets you edit it kind of as if you were editing Microsoft Word. So if all of the different options kind of get annoying to you and you're sick of looking at them, this is one other way you can edit them. And it automatically will format it for you. I find it to be a little bit slower, and it's just not what I'm comfortable with, but it is a really cool new feature that you can rely on while you're typing. You can also, click bold, italics, underline, and forget everything we learned on Tuesday, but that's not the point of the class. So I'll never know if you use this, of course, but it's a really cool tool that you could use if, let's say you forgot how to make a hyperlink and you don't want to just Google it real quick. You could just switch over to that and add a hyperlink that way. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover. I'm going to stop the recording now if I can find it, and then I'll answer the chat.